is The Ship of Brides by JoJo Moyes. It was disappointing for me. I should have liked it because it's historical fiction and it addresses something that I was completely unaware of. But it's set during World War II, or right after World War II, when it has ended. And the premise is that there were war brides. These particular war brides are from Australia, but there's that idea where soldiers, when they're stationed overseas in other countries, they would meet women and marry them. And now that the war is over, these women are gonna go live with their husbands. These Australian war brides, we have 4 in particular. There's Frances, Margaret or Maggie, Avis, and Jean. Before I go any further, I suffer from extreme motion sickness. And even though I take motion sickness medicine, it doesn't always help. And I listened to this audiobook in the car, which I know you guys are like, why don't you just drive? Well, my conundrum is I hate driving. So on a trip, I either have to drive, which, not that I'm a bad driver, but you just don't want me to drive. Or I can sit in the passenger seat and want to vomit the whole time. As I am lying there, trying not to puke everywhere, it was hard to really focus on the story and stay with the story. And then the format, which it probably is fine if I were reading the book, because it would switch between characters. And with the book, it was probably, we finish our paragraph, we have that gap, and then we start a new paragraph, which lets us know it's a new narrator. In the audiobook, it is not that cut and dry. So it feels like we're just head hopping. So that, plus the fact that I was focusing on other things sometimes when I was listening to this book, I got really confused as to who was speaking. Plus, even though we have 4 main characters, 4 brides, 3 of them are narrators, and then we have 2 male narrators. There's Nichols, who is a Marine on the ship, and then there is their captain, Hightower, so we get both of those guys. The story opens with this grandmotherly figure who is on vacation with her granddaughter in India, and they stop at this shipyard, which is when she encounters this ship we can assume is the Victoria, which is the ship that the brides were on, where normally they're on luxury liners, but these brides, because everything's wrapping up and they don't have any luxury liners left over to ship brides over, they get on an aircraft carrier. So we start with this grandmotherly figure, and then she sees this ship and she's so overcome, and then we slide into the actual narrative. But we don't go to our brides. We start with Maggie's aunt, and then we shift over, we may shift into Maggie, but I think we actually then shift to Frances, who I'm a little confused as to her terms. She's referred to as sister, so I don't know what that means, if it means that she's religious, if she's a nun or something. But anyways, she's definitely a war nurse. So we shift into her superior, giving us this view of Frances as she's preparing to leave. And we get the sense that something's not quite right with Frances, but we don't know what it is. And then we slip into Avis. We slip back to Maggie as she is preparing to board the ship. There's a little bit of spoiler. We are led to believe that Maggie's mother has died, when in actuality she left the family. And this was something I could have done without completely, because it was such a non-situation. It would have been more effective had her mother died than to let us believe the entire novel that she died when in actuality she left. The only reason it's revealed that she left is because Maggie writes her a letter. Well, you know what? She can still write her mother a letter if she's dead. She just can't send it, but she can still write her feelings out on paper. So the whole "my mother's not actually dead" storyline was non-essential. But one thing Maggie has left over from her mother is a dog. We learn that she has emptied her basket and snuck the dog onto the ship. which we could have figured out otherwise. Like, we already knew leading up to the scene I'm about to tell you about that something wasn't quite right. So we could have figured this out without this scene. But what happens is then we go and we are narrated by her dad, who realizes what she's done. I'm like, was that really necessary? And then we jump into some more brides, or maybe we jump into, it might have been Hightower, and then we jump into Nickel, and then we get to a bride, and it's really confusing. Eventually those ancillary characters are left on shore. While I understand why the men were included, because it does give us a better sense of life at sea, of what it means to live on a ship, of what it means to have been a soldier, or the way that the war has affected them in their personal lives. It wasn't their story, and I thought it took away from the bride stories. I'm about to get to the plot, I promise. But in preparation for this, because I was so confused about what was going on, I read someone's review, because essentially she just explained who the characters were, and then she gave kind of her thoughts on the book. And she said that, yeah, it started slow, but it really picked up, and Frances was her favorite. So that was what I had in mind. That's what I was expecting. But if she meant the beginning was slow, as in 99% of this book was completely useless, then okay. Before I get into the plot, I'm gonna ruin everything. Part of the worry of being a war bride is that you don't know what is going to happen at the other end of your journey. This is going to be a 6-week journey from Australia to England, and we are made aware of the fact that some of these brides might not make it. Maybe they get the telegram saying, don't come, I don't want you anymore. Maybe they receive a telegram saying, look, your husband died, or your husband is missing, or maybe they get themselves knocked up by a sailor on the ship. Like, and then again, they are rejected. And you're also wondering, so are these good men? Who are the husbands? Are they as great as we're led to believe? Are they not as great as we're led to believe? So I like the air of suspense, of mystery, of we don't know who's gonna make it, we don't know who's not gonna make it. So this is what I'm gonna give you. Maggie is married to Joe. Maggie is like 7-8 months pregnant when she boards the ship. Again, I was really put off by the timeline, because when we first meet her, she felt like she was ready to pop. Yet I think there's another couple weeks before she gets on the ship, and then of course there's 6 more weeks before she actually gets to England. So I'm like, is she gonna have this kid on the boat? She meets Joe, and Joe is the only good husband out there of all the brides. The only thing that we really get about Maggie is the surprise about her mother, as well as she eventually reveals that she's afraid to be a mother, and she doesn't know if she can handle being a mother. Like, she never planned on even marrying, and then she met Joe, and now she's got this kid on the way, and she's just super stressed. And of course, as soon as she gets off the boat, and she's worried that Joe is not going to want her anymore because she's got all the pregnant stuff going on, and he's like, ooh, that's the ugliest woman I've ever seen. Of course, she gets off the boat, and he's like, oh, I'm so glad to see you, I love you, this is my mom, she loves you too, happily ever after. And then we have Jean. So I think the women are generally, at least our 4 main characters, are generally 18 to maybe early 20s. Jean is 16. She met her husband Stan when she was 15. I think they got married when she was 15. And so she got on the ship because she said she was pregnant, even though she wasn't pregnant. And this is something that was planted early on, was how immature she was, and the fact that if she was pregnant, it wasn't by her husband. This is a part where I either slept through, because sleeping really helps when you're nauseous, or I fast forwarded through it. She has some kind of incident with someone or some men on the ship. I don't know what kind of advantage was taken of her, but she has been warned by Stan to behave herself, and wouldn't you know it, I don't know, 1 week, 2 weeks into the trip, she receives the "I don't want you anymore" telegram because somehow word had gotten to him. I don't know if it was word about the pregnancy. I don't know if it was word about her behavior on the ship because she'd been drinking a lot and she'd been going out and being around guys and flirting and this and that. Jean gets kicked off the ship where in actuality, she'd made up being pregnant so she could come to see her husband. Yet nobody wants to listen to her. Nobody wants to get her story into account. And by all rights, they seem to be a good match. Like, they seem to be in love. Obviously, he didn't love her enough to want her to keep coming. But so yeah, Jean got kicked off the ship before we even got to know her, which is a problem for me. Why is she a main character if we didn't even get to know her? Avis is the rich, proper society lady. She basically has a facade. She wants everybody to see her one way, but she isn't really that sort of person in real life. And she marries a guy named Ian. Avis, you kind of know from the beginning that her marriage is doomed because you just don't want good things for her. But we learn quickly that he's not invested in her. He's not as invested in her as she is in him, or as other husbands are in their wives. She's not getting the mail. She's not getting the feedback. Like, they had gotten married very quickly. Her family was planning this to-do over in England, yet his family was not getting in contact with them. So there was a lot of fishy stuff going on. And then we learn that she gave it up before they even got married. There were a couple of instances where we go back in time, and I could have done without those. But in any case, we get this flashback to how she slept with Ian before they got married, and then she surprises him with the news that she'd actually already planned their wedding. They were gonna get married the next day. You see that he's not happy about it, but he goes through with it even though he's acting funny at the wedding. What we learn, he's already married. It had crossed my mind. Really, what I was thinking was that he was promising marriage to her just so he could sleep with her, and then he was never going to see her again. She winds up pregnant. This is one thing I really could not stand. It could be good, but it was overdone in this novel. Moyes would give us cliffhangers. She would give us a taste of something, but she wouldn't tell us what was actually happening until later in the book. An example is Avis writes to Ian to tell him she's pregnant. She receives the letter back from him. And you can guess it's not going to be good news. She reads it. She's obviously upset. And then we switch to another character. And so you don't really know what's in the letter. My assumption was he's saying, because we're told he doesn't really want kids. Like, he would just be happy to be with her. And so now that a baby is on the way, he could be rejecting her because that's not what he wanted. So that's what my assumption is, that he is saying, I don't want you anymore. In actuality, what we eventually, I'm talking eventually learn, and that is the problem with these little cliffhangers she keeps giving us. He's already married, and he already has kids, but he and his wife are more like brother and sister than husband and wife. So essentially, if he wants to keep Avis on the side, that'd be okay, because he truly loves Avis. However, his children are so young that he doesn't want to disrupt their lives. So it's going to take a while before their love can really be out in the open. Oh my gosh, like, this is just character development, character arc. Really slow and then really rushed. She gets off the ship, sees her family, because even though she took a 6-week boat journey, they forked over the cash for the mother, father, and sister to fly over. She sees them in the crowd and she knows what questions they're gonna ask her, and then she just has to say, it's not gonna work. He's not coming for me. I'm coming back to Australia. Oh my gosh. We learn vaguely he never divorced his wife. We don't know what happened to her. We don't. Like, I think she obviously went back to Australia. There was no resolution for her. So yes, that's part of my problem when I said there's just summed up like that. Did I already talk about Maggie? No. Frances. Finally, Frances. Maggie was my favorite. I connected the most with Maggie. I thought she had the most personality. I was most drawn into her love story because it seemed like it truly was a love story. But Frances is the one who intrigued me the most because you knew she had something to hide. My thought was that her husband, that Chalky, had died, and she was so traumatized by it that she was just left damaged. Something along the lines of her husband was no longer with us. Like, you know something is up with the husband because he's never talked about. Like, you get his name, but there's no mention of letters. There's no mention of an expectation of letters. We don't get any reminiscences of hers. All we know is she just wants to keep to herself. She wants to take care of people as a nurse, and there we go. Frances had grown up impoverished. One day, the guy who they rented from comes to the door, and he's like, your mom is not paying me, so you need to come work for me at my, not a saloon, but like his inn, his hotel, motel, whatever kind of establishment. Getting a little bit ahead of myself, what this guy does is he essentially turns Frances into a whore. The mother eventually disappears, and you get the idea that by working at this establishment, that's what she ended up doing too. Whatever the case, she disappears into the night. He comes to Frances, and she's only 14, 15, and he's saying, there's no point in you living in this house anymore, especially because I have renters who are willing to pay more. So why don't you just come live at my establishment? You can live here, you can work here, it'll be a great situation for everyone. And then he comes to her one night, and he, does what he does. Eventually he starts pimping her out to his friends. She did not heed other people's warnings to get out in time. But then one night she's incredibly drunk and she's sort of at her wit's end, and the cook, he's like, here, take the money I had saved up to escape and get out of Dodge. And this is when she goes, it's her nurse's training, this and that and the other. However, her past comes back to haunt her because there are soldiers who recognized her. We are on the ship. She's keeping to herself, but she's falling in love with Nickel, the Marine, who is falling back in love with her, or who is falling in love with her back. They never speak a word to each other. She doesn't even know his name. I'm assuming he knows hers because he was set to guard their room, obviously to keep the women chaste. They're falling in love with each other, even though they don't talk to each other. But she is summoned. One of his colleagues comes up to him and says, hey, we need your help. We need her to come look at these two people, because there had been some kind of a to-do. And after the to-do was over, some people wanted to continue their fun, so they went to, I think, an engine room. I was completely lost on this ship. I thought the world building was really poor. That review that I read said that this gives you a great insight into life at sea. I disagree. I can't picture this engine room, but the whole point is this sailor and a bride had fallen into one of the engines, and it's like, I'm picturing a huge catwalk maybe 50 feet or so above all these engines that are inside like cylinders. So I'm imagining that these two people have fallen into one and are severely injured because of the fall, maybe even dead, maybe whatever. I guess the reality is, from wherever they were, it was only about a 15-foot drop, which is still a lot when you're falling onto a hard surface. So he is knocked out. She has a cut, and whatever the thing, they only have 20 minutes before the change of guard, which I don't even know why that matters, because it doesn't seem to matter that the women are always out of bounds when they're not supposed to be out of bounds. But so there's this 20-minute time frame, and Frances is cutting it close. Avis and Maggie had come with her, and we shift back to them, and Maggie notices this guy staring at Frances. From there, we learn about her past. her past is coming back to haunt her. So now the entire ship knows that she used to be a hooker. I find this rich, and this probably was the best aspect of the novel, in which these women are so judgmental of her and her past when you get a pretty clear indication that they're not staying true to their men while they're on this ship. So I'm like, that's really rich. Way to see the speck in someone else's eye before you see the log in your own. That's all, folks. As much as I hated their treatment of her, this was obviously handled in terms of writing well enough that I could get angry. So it's good, it's bad, it might be my favorite part just because there was nothing else that stood out in this novel. We get to England and the women are disembarking. Nickel, what had happened with him, I'm a little uncertain. He was married, and he has received a letter from his wife saying that she met someone else, and this someone else got her pregnant. He's gonna move her and their 2 boys over to America. She just wants to let him know, and she would really appreciate if you'd write her back. Apparently, this is not the first letter he's received, and he just refuses to write her back for whatever his reasons are. Now he's falling in love with Frances, although he's under the assumption that Frances is married, and then Frances is falling in love with him, and she's under the assumption that he is married. But then at the end, when all the women are disembarking, he does that grand run gesture where he's searching all over the ship for her and he can't find her, and we're led to believe that he never does. Only to learn, now we're tying back to the old woman at the beginning of the story, that she is Frances, that he actually ran off the ship in search for her. Like, he didn't just stand at the railing and watch the sea of women. He went in there and he figured out how to find her, and then they, lived happily ever after. That's that. That's the women. And I guess, in a sense, that's the plot, where we have these women. We don't really know what's going to end up. Oh, Avis loses the baby. Somehow a fire started. All the women had to abandon ship. Avis couldn't swim, but she and Frances jump into the water, and I don't know if it's the impact, I don't know if it's the shock of it all. Something causes her to miscarry. So there's that too, where she doesn't actually end up going full term with her pregnancy. One thing, well, actually there's 2 things that I sort of liked, but I wanted more of. Every chapter was headed, and I'm assuming these are factual articles and excerpts from journals and newspapers, but they're headed with these little excerpts. The problem with them is they're really interesting, but then they have nothing to do with the chapter. Like, one of them talks about the lasciviousness of what goes on these ships between the men and the women and the places that they find to have sex, and then nothing. I'm like, what did that have to do with anything? I would have really liked if you'd expounded upon these entries to mirror them within the chapter. Otherwise, they were pointless. With that, there was this constant hint about another ship called the Indomitable, and that was the Hightower, the captain of the Victoria. That was his ship. You're trying to figure out, why isn't he on that ship? What happened to that ship? You get the sense that they've lost some men, some important figures, and this has sort of upset the balance of what's going on in the Victoria. Maybe, as I said, I was dealing with my car sickness, and maybe I slept more than I thought I did, or maybe I just didn't pay as close attention as I thought I did, or maybe Moyes did not explain it well. But I was under the impression, because of these clips that each chapter starts with, that the forbidden relations between brides and crew caused issues with the Indomitable. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong. Indomitable? Indomitable? No, Indomitable. I think it's whatever. I was thinking, because of whatever happened between the men and the women on that ship, that's why there were extra precautions being taken on the Victoria. No. The Indomitable, I don't think it was a Pearl Harbor ship, but it was that same type of situation where it had been docked, and I think it was the Japanese. The enemy, sorry, it's midnight. I can only think of the Allies. The enemy comes and they bomb the ships. His ship ends up sinking with men inside, including his nephew, who again was a character that I'd been expecting so much for, and was extremely disappointed because I thought he was going to be a much bigger player, when in fact it was just about the fact that Hightower lost someone close to him. So I thought there was much more potential with the Indomitable, either because it had also been a ship of brides in which the people in charge of shipping brides learned a lot from, because a lot of mistakes were made, or because, yes, it had been a ship that had been sunk during World War II, and there's just so much to even go into there. But as I've said, I still thought the men's perspectives were unnecessary, so we never would have gotten the Indomitable. We never would have gotten that sidetrack of the Indomitable if we hadn't had the men's perspectives. But I wished in the end that we'd had Jean, because I never got to know her. She was like a gnat buzzing around you, super annoying. There's so many opportunities to develop her and to create her into someone that you didn't expect. And even, I don't know if it's the book's description or just a description I found on someone's review site, but it talks about how Jean is more than just a naive child. Like, her relationship with her husband is more than you think. Is it? Was it? I never saw anything, because she played around, she got herself in trouble, and then her husband said, I don't want you to come anymore. And I was like, I was hoping for a lot more from Jean. I liked how she represented a kind of woman who wants more from her life, because she did come from a family of little means. She came from a family that didn't particularly show love for her, and so she's embarking on this great new life only to have it ripped away from her. And maybe that was the point, is you want to feel bad for Jean because you wanted her to have great things, but I would have enjoyed, rather than having those two men, rather than having Maggie's aunt, I mean, even the opening and closing with old Frances, I would have rather had Jean come in and give us her story. Maybe even give us her story going back to Australia. What does that look like to be a bride sent home? Oh my gosh, that reminds me. The dog. The dog. I can't pronounce the dog's name. I think it's Maud Gom. Forgive me. I know the first name is Maud. I have no idea what the second name is because I haven't actually seen it on paper, but it sounded like Gom. I've expressed this before. I will express this again. Pets are like any other character, which means if you're gonna include a pet, it needs to have a point. We make a point of having Maggie sneak this dog on. We make a point of showing her dad realizing what she's done. The dog serves no purpose. I don't know if this is supposed to be representative of something that brides really did, where they tried to sneak their animals on board, but even then, why? The dog, they never get caught, even though Nickel, he knows, because at some point he asks Frances, he said, whose dog is that? But she doesn't get in trouble. You get the impression that yes, it is difficult to sneak the dog out to do its business, to sneak the dog out so it can get exercise, to provide a decent life for a dog on ship, or a contraband dog on ship. But the dog doesn't cause problems in the bunk. The dog doesn't bring the women together. The dog doesn't bring Francis and Nickel together. The dog dies. When there was the fire on the ship and the women all went overboard, when Maggie got back on board, the first thing she does at 9 months pregnant is hightail it back to her room to find this dog, only to discover the dog is gone. She tracks it down to the bathroom where it's dead on the floor. And there you go. That's it. It's not even a dog that fully represents what she lost with her mother. Because, okay, I'll take it as a symbol. Because this is why she brought the dog with her. Because it is the lasting memento, or the last memento she has of her mother. But it's not like throughout the book, when she sees this dog, it's related back to her mother in some way and reveals Maggie's healing or anything. It was so pointless, yet we have so much focus on it. If you've read The Ship of Brides, tell me, what do you think of this dog? Was it as pointless to you as it was to me? Overall, I'm shocked that this book was not better executed. Not that it wasn't well written, except for the fact that it was boring. There was a lot of underdevelopment. There was a lot of extraneous. Okay, you know what? Let's just say it wasn't a well-written book. Like, technically good sentences, okay? But that's about it. But it felt antiquated, which I could be okay with because it's from another time period. So yeah, they're gonna speak differently, but it lacked vitality. The narrator wasn't bad, but I don't think she helped the situation. I don't think she helped bring life to the narration. It made the story feel older than it needed to be, and without exciting language and emotion, it made it hard to connect and to care about the story. So this one, if you're a JoJo Moyes fan, go ahead and read it. If you like Lisa Jewell, if you like Kate Morton, maybe Kate Morton, if you like Leanne Moriarty, try it. I don't think you're gonna love it. I think you're gonna see it as slow and underdeveloped. But there are far worse books you could have read, like The Cruel Prince or Lauren Conrad's LA Candy series. Oh, there's so many more, but I'm not gonna fire any more bullets. Ship of Brides, not my favorite. I'm disappointed. I'm saddened. I'm heartsick. But what you're gonna do, I'm gonna move past it, read another book of hers that hopefully will be better, and restore my faith in the woman named JoJo Moyes. If you've ever read a JoJo Moyes book, tell me what it was. Tell me if you liked it. Tell me if you didn't like it. Do you recommend it? Do you want me to read it and do a review on it? We'll have a chat. Until then, bye.